Hello and welcome. As the final video for this series, we're going to be looking at sex for sale. The book breaks this into a couple of sections. We're going to look at pornography, and then we're also going to look at sex work. Where do you even begin? Again, with this class, tend to start with an evolutionary psychological approach to take that biopsychosocial kind of approach to this. And the first thought that comes to my mind is this psychological experiment that we've done on monkeys. And monkeys, for example, will offer bananas to be able to look at pictures or images of an alpha female and their genitalia. So again, are humans animals in a sense? Yes, we have this outer cortex of our brain, which enables all this awesome, deep reflective thinking and higher level executive functioning, along with art and all the other beautiful things that we do, language, math, music. But again, we have this basic biology that is driving us. Okay, we are driven to seek out sexual encounters. We are driven to seek out reproduction. We are driven to seek out food, shelter, warmth, comfort, brain rewards. Okay, and so as sexual beings? Are we enticed by sexual things, whether it's sexual objects, whether it's, images, whether it's the real life realities? And so again, remember our brain can live in the real, but our brain can also live in the fantasies, which is why we're able to take something like a screen or image and somehow that is capable of arousing our bodies to produce orgasms. And so again, it's complex, but again, that's the ability of our brain. But when it comes to things like pornography, again, we can look at it from a historical perspective. If you look at humans throughout all ancient cultures, we have had these types of images, whether they're considered sexual or erotic, or whether they're Mother Nature images, again, depends upon the cultural context and the meanings that we apply to these situations. Because if you go back thousands and thousands of years, you always find dolls, not necessarily dolls, but like, little figures of fertility, because fertility was just incredibly important cultural thing of human existence and ancient cultures going back thousands of years. We would create fertility gods, whatever it might be, to aid in the production of having babies or whatever it might be. And then these images might, show physical genital areas. Okay. That's one type. So again, is that pornography? Or is that just creation of idols and worshiping fertility and fertility gods or whatever it might be? Again, the idea here is how we portray things and what we're excited by can be biological in nature, because there are predetermined things that excite us and sexually arouse us that's built into our genetics. But a lot of it can be learned and meaning attached to these things and what it means also in the cultural context. Okay. So the meanings that we apply to sexually explicit images, things along those lines, is culturally specific. Sometimes it's more overt. Like in modern times, when you think about pornography, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it sexually explicit content? You know what I mean? So again, the definition of pornography is written, visual, or spoken sexual material. But again, look at any romance novel. Is that pornography? There is so much written, spoken, stuff in those books. Like if you read any old cowboy books, the cowboy books are dirty. I just remember my dad loved Louis L'Amour, and so I got into cowboy books when I was like younger, and I was like, wow, okay, this is interesting reading, you know what I mean? And so again, how we label things is whether it's pornography or whether it's just art and creations of us, these are all cultural labels. Because does pornography then mean anything that relates to anything sexual? And so again, here is where we kind of get into that cultural definitions of what pornography means versus art, because you have the beautiful Renaissance art that portrays naked females and males across the board everywhere, using religion as the context for the painting. Is that pornography? You know what I mean? I mean, it's showing sexually explicit genitalia, and this is on churches and on church walls. Is that acceptable? You know, and so depending upon the cultural context, some cultures throughout history have embraced sexuality. Some cultures throughout history encourage piousness, and sex should only be for reproduction. And so again, depending upon your cultural context, dictates the meanings we attach to sex, dictates the meanings that we attach to objects in the social context, like art. And I don't mean like art objects when we're talking about atypical behaviors. I mean like looking at sexually explicit art or film or cinema or written word or sexually erotic stories that you might find in a magazine or something along those lines, or in any ancient works, because apparently it's throughout all human history. So again, the idea of what is pornographic, it evolves over time, and of course, like everything, it depends upon the epoch, what time frame we're talking about, what culture we're talking about, what country we're in, what specific subculture within that country we're in. Okay. And in modern times, are we much more exposed to it due to the technological increases? Okay. And so, what are we going to label as pornographic? Should all dirty stories on the internet be labeled as pornographic? And this is kind of where you get into, okay, at what point does the government, the institutions we create to socially control people, at what point does we as the government or we as a country determine what something is pornographic? And so, of course, we have over time labeled these with obscenity laws. Your book gets into a big debate about obscenity laws like in the 1950s and what was acceptable and how those have evolved over time, what's considered indecent and what's allowed. Your book has a list of like all the topics that are banned in UK, including things like violence, abuse, portraying a child, and interestingly, showing a female orgasm. And you're not allowed to show a female ejaculation in the UK because to them that's too similar to like peeing on someone, and so that's not considered acceptable. But even though that's a totally natural process, so you can have male ejaculation shown in UK pornography, but not female because of the substance. Even though there are two different types of substance, urine versus female ejaculate is two very different substances. So again, but that's how the book kind of discusses it. It looks at it as like, what do we consider obscene? What is too taboo? What do we label as acceptable pornography? What do we label as unacceptable pornography? Is pornography allowed at all? And again, all of this is culturally defined. And then you get into the debate versus what is freedom of speech and what is censorship, what is acceptable and what is not. And then if you go to different countries, like I've talked about before, if we go to France, something like nudity is going to be much more exposed. Like you're going to see more of that, whereas in America, a little bit more sexually repressed culture, the body itself tends to be covered up and it's only acceptable in certain places, for example. So again, when we look at pornography, realize that humans have been creating what we could label as either sexual, sexually explicit, pornographic, or any other number of labels. We've been creating this type of material throughout human history. Your book has all the, like Indian temples and things from back in the day with sexually explicit, carved things on there. I mean, is that pornography or is that just art in an ancient Hindu temple? You know what I mean? And so, same with Michelangelo and the 16 chapels sitting in the Vatican in Rome. I mean, at what point, you know what I mean? And so all of this is interesting. When it comes to whether it's helpful or harmful, again, it's just a pro and con back and forth debate. Does pornography reduce sexual violence against women? Okay. Does pornography cover gaps in relationships, maybe where somebody has a higher sex drive than the other person? Your book gets deep into all of these kinds of things, right? Maybe it's helpful that it reduces stress because when you have sex and you have orgasms, it reduces stress. Maybe it's helpful, like your book talked about, where couples enjoy watching sexually explicit material together. Your book also talks about it being helpful with women learning how their bodies work so they can actually have an orgasm. And so when we look at whether it's helpful or harmful, again, we're going to be looking at, several things, but again, what are the harms? And so I'm a sociologist at heart, and so what I'm looking at first, of course, is why do people engage in pornography? Why do they choose to take off their bodies? Is this something they would do if they weren't economically a minority, maybe in the lower classes? Is your social class location associated with whether you do pornography or the region you live in or any number of things, right? Now, your book does get into some things. It talks about the difference between pornographic sex workers versus sex workers that are on the streets hustling or escorts. And it does talk about how, pornographic sex workers that are making videos actually have positive attitudes about sexuality, positive self-esteem. And so there can be some benefits, but I would be hard pressed to argue that the average pornographic worker has positive experiences. Maybe, they are cool with it, maybe they're not. What's their perception of it? I have a whole slide here for the end just to kind of look at all of this. So just to kind of introduce you to you. But again, if we're going to perceive whether it's harmful or helpful, we have to look at it on different types of levels. On a societal level, how does it affect things? Does it cause social problems? Does it take them away? On a psychological level, what's happening to the people that are using pornographic material to reach arousal, and what happens to the people that are involved in the production of pornographic material? And then on a biological level, do we have these needs, desires, wants to seek out this type of material? Okay. And then again, what happens if it's unwanted? And again, we'll talk about that in a second. Again, it's a little bit dark, but again, just the back and forth. But when it comes to sex work, again, your book talks about all types of different types. I mean, you have working in brothels, you have working in the streets, you have regulated systems, you have decriminalized systems. It comes in different forms and fashions. You have men having sex with men, women having sex with women, men having sex with women. You also have the dark side of this, that the average person that engages in sex work that tends to be a prostitute is a minor. It's like 12 to 14 globally. It's incredibly dark. Your book does not get on all the good sociological statistics. Again, this is a psych book, but the sociological statistics are dark and sad. Again, we take young girls, they get trafficked, they get brought over to the United States. Most of them come out of China, Russia, and Africa, things along those lines. It's dark. Yeah. But sex work, how long has it been around? And so again, if we take again this historical approach, throughout all of human history, there has been some form of prostitution that's been engaged in, some type of sex work, okay? Whether it's belly dancers or whether it's geishas, whether it's the Roman girls that the book talks about. Now, and it talks about various reasons why people get in it. Like your book was talking about Rome and the Roman girls, and it's saying that that was because it's a patriarchal society. That was one way that women could get education and participate in politics by surrounding themselves around strong men. You have the training of women, to engage in this type of work. You have, yeah, again, a lot. I don't even know how I feel about half of that now that I'm thinking about it. Like, I mean, how do you feel about a geisha? Would a girl normally just choose to go be a geisha? Satisfying the wills of men. Again, it's just like, what's up with the society that we construct and how do we end up this way and why do people engage in this? So yes, when it comes to this type of work, some people just choose to do it. Maybe they love it. Maybe they make good money, or maybe they enjoy the work itself. But again, if we look at the vast majority of people engaging in this type of behavior, is this what they would choose to do with their life if they could? When we're little kids and we're like, what do we want to be when we grow up? Is this definitely like a strong answer you think that most people might hear? But again, it's existed throughout history because we are humans creating a society to suit our needs, right? And so what are human needs? We need food, so we have a whole system set for that. Government, politics, to order society, we have a whole system for that. We need family structures to socialize people, to prepare them to, go to school. We have the education system. And again, we've also had a system historically for sex work to fulfill that need across all generations. But again, is that a need that ever should be filled? You understand? Like that's just, because then I'm just thinking about the people that engage in that and, you know. And your book gets back and forth. Like it looks at the pros and cons of legal versus unlegal. Like girls in legal situations, they get to pick who they're with. They have the right to turn down someone they don't want to be with, versus someone who's hustling it on the street and is getting absolutely exposed to violence, abuse, rape, drugs, a whole different type of thing. So yes, it's been around for all of human history, but what does that say about humans? You know? That we're sexual and like to have fun, or is there more of a dark side? So yes, legalization tends to remove a lot of the negative problems associated with sex work. Like it reduces the transmission of sexual disease, it reduces sexual violence. You can open some good doors to there. But again, why would someone go to work here in the first place unless they didn't need the money? And so again, the definition of sex work is selling sex for money or some other form of commodity, and why do people choose to go into that? Would they do it if they weren't economically stressed? You know what I mean? And so again, that's where it's at, the psychological decisions of why do we sell drugs? Is it because we're poor, or is it just because we love to sell drugs? Does the average person with money sell drugs? You know what I mean? Just looking into things. Legalization definitely helps with the health, and it definitely helps with the safety. It improves working conditions, etc. Um, but the actual work itself can be very dark, very dangerous. Women and children are especially vulnerable to this. Okay. Sex work has decreased since the 1990s, and I wrote in there why. And again, all crime, drug use, people having sex in general, people dating in general, people getting married, people having kids, all of this has decreased. And it could just be the increase in technology, more phones, we're all playing our video games, we're not seeking out this type of behavior as much. Plus, the transition to sex work has definitely gone toward an online virtual situation, which has its own debate. Your book has some good conversations about that. So definitely, if you guys are interested in that, you can write about that this week for your discussion boards. But you have seen a decrease. However, the highest is in Africa and China. Again, where there is poverty, there tends to be more of this. And then also where there is women's sexuality is more restrictive, you tend to find higher sex workers because women aren't allowed to just go out in the world and have fun and meet people. Okay. But to kind of wrap all this up, I brought it out, the psychology of all this. Why are we even talking about this in the first place? But again, we have to understand human behavior. And if we don't understand human sexual behavior, that's a huge chunk of human behavior. Sex motivates us to go out in the world and interact with other people. It's associated with why we choose to get in relationships. It's associated with the social construction of marriage and legal support of marriage. It's very complex, okay? And so human sexual behavior is something we have to understand. So why do we seek out pornography? And again, I like that evolutionary psychological approach, and that our body does motivate us, right? It's seeking out things, and our brain is also primed to seek out certain stimuli that excite us, right? Stimulate us. So we are looking for stimuli. It's built into us to go in the world and seek out stimuli. But again, why do people engage in this type of work? And again, yes, some people might choose to engage in this type of work, but again, a lot of it has to do with economic depression and lack of access. What do most prostitutes have in common? The inability to read a book. Again, when you can help someone become illiterate and you can help them get an education, to get a better job, to get some money in their pocket, to set themselves up, they're far less likely to engage in these risk type of behaviors like prostitution. Okay. But our emotions, our motivations, our cognitions, how much of that is wrapped up in sex and that motivates us, right? You got to think about it. And then how do we perceive the reality of it all? How do we perceive prostitution and sex work? Are we okay with it? Do we feel guilty about it? Do we become dependent upon it where unless we're having that? And then your book gets into things like, what does it teach us? Does pornography, is that good sex? Does that what good orgasms look like? And so a lot of people think that sex should look like something that you see in a pornographic movie, but is that even realistic? is that really what, is that's satisfying, I guess? Is that an accurate portrayal of what good human sexuality should be? But again, what sex is completely arbitrary and dependent upon the individual and the culture and how that's labeled. But again, what are some of these negative effects that psychologists might have to come across? Again, as a psychologist, you're going to come across victims of sexual abuse, of neglect, of physical abuse, of having been drug addicts and made decisions while they were on drugs that they're not happy about, guilt, shame about some of the things that we engage in. Again, but sex workers, for example, they, can experience a lot of PTSD, flashbacks, fear, nightmares, emotional numbness, difficulty sleeping, concentrating, drug abuse, and then they engage in sex work because they're drug addicts, or they might become drug addicts to cope with them and going in sex work, right? Having negative feelings, negative affect, negative self-esteem, suicidal thoughts, unintended pregnancies, gang rape experiences, experiences of confinement and abuse, rape, danger, violence. These are all things that people do to them. These are all things they experience. And then your book gets into trafficking. And this is, this is what happens. Humans are capable of doing this to other humans. You know, So what does that tell you about humanity as a psychologist? And so again, you always have to balance that. Should we apply positive psychology here, right? And finish on a happy thought, like humans, let's live up to our fullest potential. How can we help you self-actualize? Does this lead us down that path? You know, just thoughts. Gender equality would reduce prostitution. Why? Because again, if you enable more people to gain access, they're less likely to make decisions, maybe out of strain or desperation or whatever it might be. So again, just to kind of wrap up this, I wish you guys the best. Thank you.